The talk I want to give you guys today is what Mitch was saying, based on a lot of the stuff that I learned from the Obama campaign. So I've got a lot of examples here, and I'll actually just get right into it. And some of this is from a presentation I did at MozCon. I've added some additional content in here just to fill some time, because the speaking spot is a little bit longer. But to give you guys some context into what we walked into at the Obama campaign in 2011. We were expecting to raise $1 billion, and we sort of spoiled this already because we already talked about how much we raised. Every single media outlet at the time was expecting us to raise $1 billion, which was a lot higher than the $700 million that the Obama campaign set in 2008, and that was an improvement on Bush's record prior. So this, then would have set another record in sequential elections. We ended up doing 1.1 billion actually. It was 690 million online, and then the rest of that was through other sources. And 690 million of it, like I just said, was online. One of the products that we produced, so just to give you an idea of like how we raised all this money, which really is a lot of money, because actually if you think about it, not that Amazon, not that Amazon is like has high profit margins, but their profits are, I think, for Q4 of 2012 were only like somewhere around 200 million, right? And so we did 690 million. Not that all of that was revenue, because we had some expenses, but it's still a pretty crazy amount to work with. But this is one of the ways that we raised a lot of that money, and this is called Quick Donate. It's a product that I got to work on from the very beginning. I worked on the product, the technical, every sort of aspect of it that you could imagine. And it seems like sort of a no-brainer. It's based on Amazon's one-click purchasing system, right? And so, like I said, it seems like such a no-brainer, right? You want to make you want to make it really easy for people to give you money. You don't want to make it like super hard. And so I remember having this meeting with our chief digital strategist, and he's like, "We're going to do Amazon one-click." And I'm like, "All right, we're going to do this." And so here's what the product actually looked like when we were done. And this hadn't been done before, so we were like totally treading new water here. We ended up raising total 115 million from this. We had 1.5 million users, and I wish I had screenshots in here for you. It's in one of my presentations, but the product allowed you to do one-click donations on the web. So if you were logged in and you had made a donation before and you saved your payment information, you could come to our website and just click a little button that had a suggested amount for you, and then the donation would be processed, like in seconds. And then also, if you came to one of our donation pages, you could just click the donate button, and that would happen really instantly. But I think the coolest part of Quick Donate was my favorite way to donate was SMS donations, and that hadn't been done before. And there was actually a reason that hadn't been done before, because the Federal Election Commission said that they had a rule that political candidates can't use SMS shortcodes. And so if you guys don't know what a shortcode is, you probably remember when the hurricane hit Haiti, or the earthquake hit Haiti, and the Red Cross ran television commercials, and they were asking people to donate, or to text like 5555, and then it would subtract like $10 from your AT&T or your Verizon bill. That's an SMS shortcode, and it makes it really easy to gather money. But we couldn't use those, and so we had to engineer a system all the way around that to get SMS working, which was challenging, but we ended up doing it. And the funny part is that right after we released that, the FEC reversed that rule and said, okay, now you can use shortcodes. But the shortcodes actually cost you money because AT&T takes a cut of what you raise. So we ended up doing ourselves a favor, but it would have been nice to start off with shortcodes to see what kind of ROI we were getting on that. But SMS was my favorite way. And then we also engineered a system where you could donate over email, which was also really innovative. And I still haven't seen this at all throughout politics or even in e-commerce. But if we sent you an email and you happen to be logged in the browser, you didn't have to be reading in the browser, but if you click one of our suggested donate amounts, the browser would just pop up and it would say you made that donation. There was a lot of innovation there, and it was a real pleasure to work on this product. But obviously we optimized these products because the volume was so high, right? And so that's what I'm going to talk to you guys about. Overall, we ran about 500 experiments on the campaign. We did weeks of user testing, and user testing is just when you sit what you would assume to be an average user of your product in front of a computer and just observe them using it. A lot of the time we make the mistake of thinking that we are the users, and I'm going to prove to you how we did that on the campaign, and we were wrong, and we actually ended up making a lot of money off that, so I'll show you that example. And then we also, so I always include this because I think it's a really interesting metric. We sent over 668 million custom events to Google Analytics, And if you guys aren't familiar with Google Analytics custom events, they're just arbitrary little pieces of data that you can shoot off to Google whenever you want to track anything. And so I'm going to talk about those in a minute too, but I think this number sort of gives you an idea of like the extent that we went to get data to sort of inform our products. That's a lot of data. I've never seen anything like that in any other company that I've worked for. And so we did all of that, and then it's like, what did you get from that? So we estimate that there's about a 49% increase in the donation page conversion rate. The tricky thing about this number is it depends on who you work for, how accurately you can measure this. The only true way to measure your total uplift is to test all of your winners against your original control before you even started running experiments. But it's hard to go to your boss and say, I want to run this experiment where I think that we will reduce our donation rate by 49%. They're like, absolutely not, we're not doing that. So this is an estimate. I just want to add that caveat. And the same thing with the 161% increase in email signups. The reason that I'm including the email sign-up number is a lot of people don't know this, but 90% of our revenue, or probably even more than 90% of our revenue, was sourced from email. We had the largest email list in the political campaign world with, I think, a little over 15 million people. And so I don't know if you got, I assume somebody here was on the list, but you probably received a barrage of emails. And so that's where a lot of our money came from. And so there's, let's see, when it comes to optimization, I usually think of it in three different ways. I think there's three different aspects to it. There's what I would say is experimentation, observation, and data gathering. And I talked a little bit about these before, but experimentation is running A/B tests and just acting like a scientist, right? And I'll talk a lot about that. Observation is the user testing that I was talking about before, and data gathering is along the lines of the Google Analytics custom events that I was talking about. And I think they all go hand in hand because if you don't have observation and you don't have data gathering, you're probably not going to know where to start with your experiments. So I'm going to walk through all of this. But the first place that I'm going to start at is experimentation. This is, I think, the coolest part. So I've got a few steps here that I want to show you what was our process on the campaign, and I've actually updated these after since I'm still doing optimization and still learning. The first step is always to identify your goals, and this might seem fairly obvious, right? You might even think on the Obama campaign, it's like, okay, your goal is to get money because without money you can't win a political campaign. But there's so many even if you consider that argument, the real end goal is to get votes, right? Money doesn't turn into votes just organically. You have to actually put the money to use and get the votes. And without email addresses, it's hard to get people to get registered to vote. So there's a lot of metrics that we're looking at, and it's really difficult to determine what's the most important, and it's really difficult to put a dollar value on an email address or a dollar value on a volunteer acquisition, right? While it might seem very, very simple to you, I would say spend a lot of time critically thinking about this and trying to keep the same metric across all of them. So if you want to talk in dollars, try to assign $1 to a volunteer acquisition or somebody who's just registered to vote. You'll have to, because you can't compare them otherwise. And one thing I want to mention with goals, this is sort of on a macro sense of goals, is that there's top of the funnel goals and there's bottom of the funnel goals. If you consider the Obama campaign's let's say donation funnel. I'll go over this in a minute, but one of the things that we did, we wouldn't. Okay, so when we run ads, right, and then people land on the page, we didn't want you to. We wanted money, right, and so we ran this experiment where we thought first let's just send people right to the donation page, and then we ran that. That was our default. That was our control. And then we changed it up. We had an idea to send people to a sign-up form first. And so when you send people to the sign-up form, you're changing the funnel a little bit because first they have to convert on the sign-up form to get their email address, and then they get taken to the donation page, right? So the conversion on the sign-up form is a top funnel, and then top funnel goal, and then when they actually make the donation purchase, that's a bottom of the funnel goal. The thing that's important to realize when you're doing these is if you're first starting out with optimization, you should probably start at the bottom of the funnel, because if you get let's say a 3% increase in the top of the funnel metric, it's not always going to translate down to the bottom of the funnel. You probably won't see a difference in the bottom of the funnel. So if you're just starting out, I would say start on the bottom of the funnel, right? Start on your checkout page if you're in e-commerce, or I'm not sure what kind of checkout funnels you guys have. The second thing is hypothesis, and this is, I think, super important, and I always stress this with people. I'm sure you guys have heard about like all these like button color tests that people run, or just like what I would classify as not smart tests. They're just like running tests to run them. Google's really famous for having tested like 37 shades of blue on their homepage or something once to answer a design question. What we did on the campaign is we tested a lot of those things in the beginning, and we realized that it didn't really matter, right? The bigger things that were really hypothesis-driven experiments mattered, where we like changed the user experience completely, or we made the design different in such that the user felt different when they landed on the page, right? You could do an ominous design saying that Mitt Romney's beating us, we need your help, or you could do a like very happy design saying, you know, like here's Barack and Michelle's anniversary and they're eating, you know, ice cream or something. And then you test those two against each other and you see what does more. And so I would say that those sorts of like big picture experiments are where you want to start. And I wouldn't waste your time doing like small button color tests. And that's what I mean by developing hypotheses. The third one, and this is really, really important, I hope you guys all write this down, especially if you plan to do any experimentation, and this is determining your sample size. Before you run any experiment, you should determine your sample size. I'm going to show you guys how to do that. This is a sample size calculator on Evan Miller. I don't know if you guys have heard of Evan Miller, but he's a super smart guy and talks a lot about, blogs a lot about A/B testing. The link to the calculator is at the bottom. So this is a screenshot, so I can't obviously change the inputs here. But there's a few things that I'll cover here. One, you have to know the baseline conversion rate. If you don't know your baseline conversion rate, you can probably grab that out of Google Analytics. So you know, like if it's land on the sign up page and then go to the donation form, you just find the difference there. And then there's a minimum detectable effect. The minimum detectable effect, some of you might find this really confusing. I did when I first saw one of these calculators. Other calculators phrase it as your estimated impact, which is impossible to figure out. So don't even think of it that way. There's no way that you could estimate an impact from an A/B test unless, well, it's just not. So the minimum detectable effect is just a number that you'll have to play around with. It's going to tell you how much of a difference you need in the conversion rate for the results to be reliable. And I always set this to relative because all A/B test results are reported in relative measure, and Optimizer reports it that way, so I suggest you guys just do relative. But you can do absolute as well. Just keep in mind that absolute 5% gain is much, much larger than a relative 5% gain. And so based on those inputs up there, you see that it's giving you an answer of 25,255 visits per branch. And per branch means if you have an A/B test, you have A as your control and B as your variation, then you'll need about 50,000 visits. So that's per variation. And then at the bottom, here's the more complicated stuff, and that's statistical power and significance. Statistical power is your ability or the likelihood that you'll produce what's called a type 2 error. And a type 2 error is just that your experiment will not show that there's a winner even when there is actually a winner, which is a very bad problem. You don't want that. But statistics are such that it's likely to happen depending on your power level. The industry standard is to set this at 80%. So that's basically saying that there's a 20% chance that when you run this experiment, it could report that there's no winner when there is actually a winner. Obviously, you want that as high as you can possibly get it, right? You'd want it at like 99%. But the tricky thing with statistical power is when you increase that in calculating your sample size goes up. You need a lot more traffic. And unless you're operating a very, very trafficked website, it's sort of not realistic. So I'll tell you later on how to combat false positives, or false negatives, I should say. That's what a type 2 error is. But there's also this metric called significance level. And this is probably, you guys are all familiar with this, I think, and this is statistical significance. The opposite of this is confidence level. So a 5% significance level would be reported in Optimizer if you guys use that as a 95% confidence level, or a 95% chance to be baseline. And what that's saying is that if you repeated the experiment 100 times, 95 times out of the 100, you would get similar or better results. Okay, so sorry about the boring statistics talks, but I think it's really, really important to understand all of this stuff. If you're not familiar with the I mean, if you're not familiar with statistics in general, just go with the baseline on the calculator. Don't change it. Just use 5% significance and 80% statistical power. These are the industry standard, which everybody uses. People usually only increase those if they're making a really, really important decision to their business, or if they have a ton of traffic, and it's like, why not? So you can read actually more on my website about sample size and how to use that calculator if you have a very, very low traffic website, but I won't go over that now. This step right here is prioritizing with ROI, and I think that this is like critical to the success of any optimization. ROI is just simply the return on the investment. So when you have you're going to have like a ton of ideas, right, to improve the page, and you have to prioritize those by ROI. And what that means is, if it's going to take you, let's say you have 2 changes on the table, right? You have one change that is going to take 10 hours of engineering time, and you expect that based on past test history to get like a 2% lift in the conversion rate. And let's say you have another experiment in the queue or an idea that you have that will take 3 engineering hours, and you would expect it to get a 10% increase in the conversion rate. You would never put the first one before the second one, right? Always go with that second one, because that's only going to take you 3 hours, and you can get a bigger lift out of that. At least you think so. But you have to apply these calculations, and you have to come up with some sort of method to do this. Otherwise, you're just shooting in the dark, and it's kind of, I mean, you're not going to get great results. This is also super important, right? Because if you have, let's say you develop, well, you've got your control, and then you create your variation, and what happens if there's bugs in your variation? That could be the reason that it's either winning or losing, right? Maybe it's misreporting conversions, your variation, and then you're like, yes, we won, and you didn't actually win, but you won't know that unless you QA the experiment. And this happened to us a few times on the Obama campaign, so we got really, really stringent with QAing experiments. Every single experiment that we created went through 2 people for QA. Well, actually went through more than that. We had a QA team that reviewed experiments, but then also the code for the variations were also reviewed by another engineer. So there was multiple people always looking at the experiment to make sure that it was doing what we thought it was doing. Obviously, you have to run the tests. 6 is super important. I mean, these are all super important. I keep saying that. You got to record your results because, you know, for us on the campaign, we ran 500 experiments. It's impossible to remember what happened in all 500 of those. If somebody came up to me and was like, hey, Kyle, what happened to that test? Like 30 tests ago, you ran something. It's like, I don't even remember the test. So we kept a Google Doc spreadsheet where we put screenshots of all the variations and the controls. We screenshotted the optimize the results page, which I think is important because you might lose access to one of these tools. Like maybe somebody decides to stop paying the bill and then you don't have access to it. You want to keep that information. It's very valuable. You can we put links to the Optimizely experiment. We kept very detailed records, and that's partly why I'm able to show you a lot of the information today. And number 7 is sort of what I was talking about before when I was talking about false negatives and false positives, and that's consider a retest. The thing about science, which A/B testing is science, right? Because you come up with a hypothesis and then you test it and then you see what the result is. It's not, science is like based on a body of evidence, not one experiment result, right? So if a scientist on, let's say, climate change produces one report, the entire scientific community doesn't say, oh my God, like this is crazy, this is happening. What actually happens is, thousands of reports get published, and then a lot of experts end up looking at this, and it's based on a body of evidence. So while you can just run one test and say that that's conclusive, it's even better if you run another test or maybe 3 tests, and that would be super conclusive if you get the same results. And so here's an example of what happened to us and why we started doing this on the Obama campaign, was why we started retesting. This was the first test we ran. This is a pretty interesting test. I thought it was brilliant when somebody came up with it. This is what our donation form looked like. On the left is the control, on the right is the variation. I wish this was bigger. You probably can't spot the difference right off the bat because it's very, very subtle, but we removed the dollar signs on the variation. And so this was based off of high-end restaurant menu psychology. So I don't know, next time you go to a high-end restaurant, take a look at the menu, you will see dollar signs. And it's because studies have shown that when there's no dollar signs, people are likely to spend more money. So we were like, okay, we're going to try this. This is so smart. So we put our variation up, and it has no dollar signs, and we're like, all right, let's get this out there. And we get a 36% increase in revenue, and we're like, wow, this is world-changing. This is incredible. I mean, a 36% increase in revenue is unheard of. And we were super happy with ourselves, and we're just like, this is crazy, we're geniuses, we can't wait to tell our boss. And then like something in me was like, wait, this is crazy, like 36% increase in revenue. Let's just retest it just to be sure, because I don't want to go tell my boss that I've raised revenue by 36% and not actually have done that. So we ran another test, and the second test was a statistical tie. And a statistical tie is not that there is no difference, but just that you don't have the data to conclude that there is a difference. And there's a big difference between those two concepts. Because when you run an A/B test, you don't have an infinite sample, and your sample doesn't include the entire population, right? And so you're making a conclusion based on a sample of an entire population. So we were saying that for this small sample of donors, this change increased the conversion rate by 36%, and we could apply that, meaning that this change would result in a 36% increase for the entire population. It actually didn't end up being true based on the second test. And so at this point, we're really depressed, right? We're like, oh my God, this sucks. We thought we were geniuses, but we're actually really dumb. And so we ran a third test, and we're like, this has got to be it. And it was another statistical tie. And so we came to the conclusion that, we came to a lot of conclusions. One was that, the difference wasn't there, and so we shouldn't report that up as a 36% increase in revenue. But also, we were scratching our heads thinking, how could this happen? It was statistically significant, the difference in revenue, and so it should be whenever we test it. But the thing is, there's a lot of things that matter when you're running an experiment, like the things I was talking about before, calculating your sample size. We weren't doing a lot of that. But picking the right sample is a really big thing, right? When we would send an email off to this email list that I was talking to you guys about earlier, so there was very active people on that email list and very not active people on that email list. And so the tail, though, would only be like 3 days. So we would send out an email, and then after 3 days, nobody would click on the email. But the people that clicked right away were always donating. They're just super engaged supporters. And the page would get so much traffic right when we sent an email. I'd imagine like this huge sucking sound happening on the internet. I don't really know what that sounds like, but that's just like what I was making up in my head. Because you would be watching and optimizing, the traffic would just jump really, really high. And so what happens is, if you stop your experiment when you hit the sample size on that first set on the active people, you're not getting any of the not super engaged people in that test. And so your sample is not truly accurate. So the right way to do it in that situation would be to run the experiment for 3 days, regardless of the sample size that you calculated. So there's a lot of things to think about, but you want to make sure that your samples are representative of the entire population. And I think that's what happened here. But just always think about retesting. It's a good idea, at least one more time. And so here's, I want to go into some examples for you guys so you can get a little bit of inspiration on what to test. This is a few different variables that we found affect the conversion rate. And the first one is copy. So I was talking about Quick Donate before. This was the opt-in to get into the program. After you made a donation, we didn't introduce the idea of Quick Donate before the donation. I'll cover that also too, on why that's a bad idea. But we showed you this screen right after you made a donation. So we temporarily tokenized your payment information, and that would expire like 3 minutes if you didn't answer the question. And so we just asked you to, if you already had an account, we just asked you to enter your password, and then it would save your payment information. If you didn't have an account, we would just ask you to create a password. So it was very, very simple. And so what we wanted to do was change the headline, because that occupies a lot of screen real estate on this page. And so we changed, sorry, I'll go back so you can see. The headline says, in the control, save your payment information for next time. And then the variation says now, comma, save your payment information. Very, very simple change. When I was talking about ROI before, you can imagine I'm setting you up for like a really high ROI experiment, because changing a few words of copy doesn't even involve changing lines of code. It's just actually changing copy. It took probably 10 seconds to make that change. And we got a 21% increase in the conversion rate, just by changing like 3 words around and adding a comma. Now, the interesting thing is that when you run an experiment like this, you can develop hypotheses on why that happened and then test those. When you're on a political campaign, you don't have time for that. You're just interested in raising extra money. So if you're at a longer, an organization that doesn't have an end date, which is very atypical, then you can actually create experiments that try to figure out why this happened. We didn't do that, obviously. So what I would say is that the copy was a little bit more direct, and it linked the variation to it linked the 2 steps. So we asked you to donate, and then we asked you to save your payment information. And the first one, it sort of seems like a separate step, right? It's like save your payment info for next time. and the second one is now comma save your payment information, it makes it seem like it's one unified step and that you need to do both. So that's what I would attribute that to. Another variable that we found affects the conversion rate is imagery. And we were lucky enough to have a photographer who was really, really good, and he traveled with the president everywhere. I was a little jealous of him because he got to go on Air Force One and go everywhere with the president. And so we had just tons of assets to work with as far as images go. So we did a lot of experimentation. This is the control for our Dinner with Barack contest, which within that 90% of revenue or higher that came in through email. A lot of it was brought in through these campaigns that we would run called Dinner with Barack, which to me, when I put my user hat on and I'm looking at this page, or supporter hat on, I'm thinking, okay, how can you just win dinner with the president, right? Like, you can't just win dinner with the president. Like, a normal person can't just be like, oh, I entered my email address and then I'm gonna have dinner with the president. And so it seems like pretty unbelievable to me, although I worked on the campaign and I knew it was happening because we were actually coordinating it and people were actually having dinner with the president. So you would submit it, and then after the contest was over, we would select a random group of people, and then do background checks and then fly them out to they had to agree. I mean, the whole process is crazy. You can't actually just go meet the president. You have to go through like all these checks. But it was legit. It was happening. But what we thought is maybe we should use an image that actually, because this image right here, you only see the president. You see the backs of two people's heads, but you don't really know who they are. You can't see their faces, and they're out of focus. So we thought, let's use an image that actually shows people, real winners, having dinner with the president, and maybe it's like a little bit more believable. So here's our variation, and you can see these people were even luckier. They got to have dinner with the First Lady and the president. You can see, sort of two average-looking people just sitting there talking to the president. Everybody's smiling and looks really happy. And that's the only thing we changed. So here's the control landing page. And then here's the, obviously we had to change the logo on the image because, it's just how the image was laid out. But to me, it just looks much more believable because you can see average people having dinner with the president. And this gave us a 19% increase in conversions. And this is really important because we got a lot more people on our email list by doing this. And then we connected them to a donation form and they got money out of them. So this was a huge win for us because, I don't know how much A/B testing you guys do, but you probably don't see 19% increases every day, probably, once or twice a year. So here's what the two images look like for you guys so you can see them. And this part is super nerdy, so I'll try to gloss over it. Performance can also affect your conversion rate. I think we all know this. The big companies have published studies. Amazon says that for every 1 millisecond, 100 milliseconds of latency that they measured, that was a 1% drop in the conversion rate. So even 1%, anybody will take that. So you always really gotta be mindful of how fast your page is loading. You guys have probably all experienced like a slow website, right? You're trying to use it and you're like, no, screw this, I'm not gonna use it. And so that's what happens. People will only sit, somewhere around 3 seconds waiting for the page to load before they leave. When we first got to the campaign, we didn't have the resources to build our own donation platform because it was like only me. I was the only developer and I couldn't do that. And this is what we started with, which was a vendor's platform. This is really nerdy. I'll just cover it really briefly. But there was a web cluster and a payment cluster. So that web cluster box, if you were requesting the actual donation page, if you wanted to see it, that cluster served it to you. And then there was a payment cluster when you actually submitted your donation. It was sent to that cluster of servers. And there was a load balancer that balanced the load. Problem was there was only like 3 nodes behind each of those clusters. So that means there's only 3 servers processing donations for the entire country. And we had peaks of about $3 million an hour at the, on the campaign. So that's not enough hardware to be powering something like that. And so one of the problems with this is that we would experience 5 to 7 second load times. And that's just what I was seeing in Chicago on a really fast internet connection. Maybe somebody was like, trying to donate when they're on their phone, or maybe they were out in the sticks and don't have fast internet, and we're making them wait 15 seconds for a page load. It's unacceptable. There was no CDN. A CDN is a content delivery network, which spreads out all of your files all across the globe. When you have a CDN, all of your files will be, so like if you're in California, let's say you're in Los Angeles, a CDN will have a server in Los Angeles, so the files will get to you really quickly. It doesn't have to go, like, let's say from Tokyo all the way to LA. depending on where your files are actually stored. There was no caching. So another problem with websites is they generate these pages on the fly each time that they're requested, and it takes a computer a while to do that. And it gets, when it has to do that for like 50,000 people, it gets inundated, and then it gets saturated, and then it doesn't work anymore. And so what you do is whatever the server sends as the output, you cache that, and you only start sending the output. You don't have to compile it each time that the page is requested. And so this is the architecture diagram of what we ended up with. It's what we built from the ground up when we had the engineering resources to do so. I'm not going to go super into that because it's all really super nerdy, but the things that I think are really interesting is, so there's two things. You want to make it really fast, and you want to make it redundant, meaning that it should never go down. Because when you have peaks of $3 million an hour, even 20 minutes of downtime, and that seems like a lot right now, but it could take 10 minutes to discover a bug, and that's even fast. I mean, I don't know if you guys run websites, how many bugs have you caught within 10 minutes? You probably don't. Probably takes an hour, and then somebody points it out to you. So, like you could get notified of a bug as an engineer an hour and a half into the bug having happened, and that just cost you a lot of money at $3 million an hour peak. And so part of the challenge was keeping the donation processors online. What we did is we kept the vendors' donation processors online. We just asked them to report their health to us. So whenever they went down, they would tell us that they were down, and then we would switch all of the donations over to the donation processors that we built. So we had what's called load balancing and failover. So if our servers went down, then we'd send them all to the vendor. If the vendor servers went down, we sent them all to our payment processors that were hosted on Amazon AWS. Now the cool part about Amazon AWS is that we distributed our servers in 2 different data centers. So one of the data centers was in Virginia. So if you had an IP address that was for the eastern side of the United States, we would send your donation to get processed in Virginia. And then if you had an IP address that was the western part of the United States, your donation would be processed in Northern California. And then we had load balancing in there, which is what I think is cool. So there was a time when the Virginia data center went down because there was a hurricane during the campaign. It's like, God, yeah, just what we need, a hurricane on top of our data center. So Amazon went down, but because we distributed our system like that, we just switched everybody in the East Coast to be processed by the West Coast, and it worked perfectly. Once we got this system in place, it never went down. And so from the performance aspects, the system we made was 80% faster time to paint. And time to paint is how soon you see something on the page, and I'll show you that. This is a service called Web Page Test. That's really awesome. You guys should write that down. It'll tell you a lot of information about why your web page is so slow and how you can fix it. The top one is the OFA platform that we engineered, and the second one is our vendor. You can see that these are film strips. The first column is 1 second, and then 2 seconds, 3 seconds, and 4 seconds. You can see ours was a functional page at 1 second. The image of the president hadn't loaded, but you could actually make a donation. You could start filling out the form. And 4 seconds in, you didn't even see anything on the vendor's page. So this was a 30% reduction in page weight. That's how much code gets transferred to your machine to display the page, and a 52% reduction in requests, which is sort of a nerdy term for meaning we made it faster. The 80% faster page. So we did the same design. We didn't change the design at all when we made the new system because we wanted to see how much the speed increase affects the conversion rate. And just the fact of it being 80% faster gave us a 14% in the conversion rate. Now, so for those who were paying attention when I was talking about ROI before, this is a lower ROI experiment than the copy change that we were talking about before, or the image change, because it doesn't take a lot of time to change copy or an image, but it took us a long time to build this new platform, right? It probably took us about 2 months, and we only got a 14% increase in the conversion rate. 14% is a lot, I'll take it, but it's not as much as that 21% increase on the other pages, right? So I hope that's starting to become clear on what I mean by ROI. When you start experimenting, you shouldn't say, let's just tear apart our website and rebuild it all from scratch. Like, do that in the background, but also be running some tests. And so when you take in the average conversion rate, or the average donation amount on this platform and how long it lived, that's about $32 million that we got just from making the page faster. And so here's another variable called user experience. This one I think is actually pretty cool too. So this is what our forms look like with the new platform when we started thinking critically about user experience. This was for a campaign that we ran called the Obama Classic. So if you remember at the time, sorry for all the stories, but this stuff makes me nostalgic. The NBA had a lockout, right? And so half of the season, I think half or a little bit more than half of the season was wasted because the players wouldn't negotiate their contracts. And so we thought, oh, this will be great. Let's get all the players to play a game with the president, because normally you can't get players to play a game outside of like actual league games, because it's written in their contract that they can't do that. So we're like, okay, people are pissed that the NBA is not putting on games, so we'll put on one with the president. Like, how cool would that be? So we organized this campaign, and we get like every single high-profile basketball player to agree to this. LeBron, Kobe, Michael Jordan, like everybody was going to come. And so we start making the pages to get people to enter in by donating. And we wanted to make something really cool. We also, too, when you look at this form, this isn't even a full screenshot, but when you look at like a donation form and it has 16 fields in it, it seems really tough to fill out, right? It just seems like a lot. It's like, I don't want to do all that. Just let me donate with one click, but if you're not even in Quick Donate, you can't donate with one click. And so what we wanted it is to look less, less time consuming. And so here was our variation that we developed. We cut it into 4 different steps. At the time, people were like, you're crazy, people don't want to do multi-steps, they just want one step. And we're like, yes, but look at this form, like it makes it look not so intimidating and time consuming. It looks like all you have to do is select an amount. Even though it's not, but it's a little psychological trick that we're playing with people. So the other thing about this is that when you just present it like this, select an amount, all they think is that to engage with the form, they just have to click a button. But once they've engaged, they're invested in the action now. And so you're much more likely to complete this form if you click on 15 than like when you first start to enter something in the first name field. It's something weird, but we observed this a lot. And so as you go through, you just go through the steps, and it's the same amount of fields. We didn't remove any, it's just the way that they're presented. This gave us a 5% increase in the conversion rate. And so I hope that the ROI case that I've been making is painfully clear. You can't easily change the design of a page like that. That took us probably a month to create. But at the time, we had already picked all the low-hanging fruit, and it was like impossible to get a winner. So we went probably a span of 2 months without getting a winner on any experiment, and this was our winner after 2 months of work. So it was very well received in the office after we were very depressed because we felt like we weren't getting anywhere. But like I was saying, this is already an optimized page. We'd optimized it for a long time. We had picked all the low-hanging fruit. We'd run hundreds of experiments on it. And so here's the difference so that you guys can see what the 2 forms look like. The one on the right is obviously looks easier to complete. So here's a few best practices that I have for you guys. I hope you guys all write these down. As far as experimentation goes, start simple. You don't have to get very advanced like the ones I was showing you here today. Just start with copy. Get yourself really comfortable with the A/B testing platform that you're using and with the principles, and then you'll slowly start to increase your sophistication. The experiments that we started with on the Obama campaign were very, very, very simple, and then we just scaled up once we start getting comfortable. The second is always have a test running. Depending on your resources, this can be hard, but I think it's worth your time because traffic is going to be coming to your web pages regardless if you have an experiment running, so you might as well be learning from it. So I always try to have an experiment running on each conversion funnel that we have. It's kind of daunting, you need resources, it's kind of stressful, but you always just want to be learning from the traffic that's coming in. Otherwise you just have wasted potential. This third one is don't be afraid to fail. And I'll show you what I mean by don't be afraid to fail. Talked about this a little bit earlier. The screenshot's a little bit messed up. In the control and the variation, the amounts were the same. I actually screenshotted the wrong thing. But what you see, this is a very subtle difference too. You probably don't notice this one right off the bat, but at the bottom on the variation, there's 2 checkboxes. One says save my payment information. And this was somebody's idea of trying to make the opt-in to Quick Donate quicker and less cumbersome, because they thought that showing the follow-up page and then explaining all of this was too much, and we should just add a little checkbox down there. And they're like, okay, we'll test that. And so that's the only change here. Like I said, the amounts didn't actually change. And what happened is we reduced the opt-ins for Quick Donate by 44%. Now this is one of those tests where when you see those results, you're like, oh my God, stop it, never try that again, like let's move on, and talk about this. And I think it's because, when people fill out forms, they're just used to unchecking everything at the end, because it's like, I don't want any emails, don't follow up with me, like don't send me anything, I don't want offers from your partners, I don't want any of that. And so that's probably what was happening. But if you notice, we even pre-checked that there. and we still got a 44% decrease in the amount of people that were opting in to Quick Donate. But that didn't stop us from trying out new experiments, because with A/B testing, the benefit is that if you have a loser, it's just for a short period of time because you don't deploy that loser to production, right? So this was only a 44% decrease in the opt-in rate for, I mean, I don't know, like maybe 4 hours. Whereas that winner that I showed you, that was a 21% increase, that was deployed for the whole life of the campaign. So that just right there, trounced on this 44% reduction, exponentially. And so you just keep on trying. You're going to have losers. Most of your experiments will be statistical ties. It's just the way that it works. But the winners definitely outweigh everything, and they're definitely worth your time. So here's another aspect of optimization I want to talk about: data gathering. So I mentioned this before. We sent a lot of information to Google Analytics. This is one of the data platforms that I happen to interact with the most. We had a lot. You probably read a lot about what we were doing on the campaign. A lot of it got very, very creepy. We had the whole voter file for the United States, and then we had people who authenticated with our Facebook app, so we could match people in Facebook and friends with who's registered to vote and who isn't. And we built cool products with that. So when you would convert on our website, we built this product called Targeted Sharing. But when you're engaging with us on our website and you had authenticated with our Facebook app, instead of asking you to share it to your wall to register to vote, what we would do is run through your friends list and see who was in battleground states and not registered to vote. And then we would say, share this with Amelia in Florida on her wall to register to vote. So we were able to do really cool things like that. But the level of it, wow, we have too much data. That's sort of one of the cool things. So I wish I had a better example, but this is one that I happen to have a screenshot from. This was sort of a report that we put up after we raised our first million donors, or we reached our first million donors. And it was sort of just a way to give back to people and do some data visualization on the donations that we brought in, and just sort of make our metrics fun to look at, and then hopefully get another donation out of you. So there's a lot of little widgets here. So the hello sample of our names. This is the part that I'm going to be talking about. That was just a little widget where you could scroll through and see actual first names of people. But you could easily go in there and choose a location. You enter your city and see how many people donated from your city. You could find your name, so however many people named Kyle, I could find out how many donated. But this hello my name is what we did. We put tracking all over everything. So anytime you engage with this page, if you click the right arrow to see a different name, we track that in Google Analytics. If you click the left arrow, we track that. If you entered a location, we track that. If you change the location after entering it, we track that. If you type something into find your name, we track that. We track how many names you would enter in there. We just tracked everything because we're very, very curious. And one of the things we found out from this was on this little widget, 82% of the clicks were to the right arrow button. And you see, this was several years ago, but now a lot of good user interfaces provide you only one arrow direction, because you rarely ever, when you're just showing one thing, go back like that. So we use this information to refine all of our user interfaces going forward. And so anytime we had this sort of UI element, we just would never put two direction arrows, because it clutters the UI. And the more you take out of the UI, the more you're going to get back from the user, because there's less for them to focus on. So that's a little trick that we use. This is all the Google Analytics custom event is. It's just one line of code, and it's very arbitrary. That's how easy it is to track this kind of stuff in Google Analytics. Like I said, it's arbitrary. We just put in 1 million infographic, and then the event was named slides right. Super simple. And so here's the third aspect of optimization that I want to talk about, and that's user testing. I've got a really cool case study for you. I always talk about this, so I apologize if you already heard it, but I think it's really cool. When we put Google Analytics custom events on our form, well, when we first got there, we had no idea what the error rate on our forms was. We didn't know which field people were having problems with. We didn't know any of this information. And you need that information to figure out what to change in an experiment, right, to make the form better. So we littered the form with Google Analytics custom events, and we could tell, which fields people were having a problem with, if they entered anything in the fields at all, how much information did they enter into the fields. It just was a lot of information. We tracked anything we could think of. And so when we first started doing this, we found that the employer and occupation fields had the highest error rates. And this isn't information that we particularly wanted, because it's pretty atypical. You don't have to provide this to Amazon or Zappos or anywhere where you make a purchase, but the Federal Election Commission requires federal candidates to collect this information. So we had to have it on there. We couldn't take it out, and it was required. And so when we looked at some of the data of what people were submitting, it was things like none of your business, F off, like I'm not going to tell you. And so we're like, okay, people just aren't comfortable providing this information because it's not standard. And that was our hypothesis, and then we all just sort of moved on because we couldn't figure out what the problem was. And then we decided to bring in some of the volunteers that were coming in through headquarters and sit them down in front of a computer. And we used a program called Silverback, which records the eyesight camera and the screen at the same time, so you can get their facial cues. You know, like if they're moving their eyebrows, they're probably really confused at that point in your form, so you can use that feedback to fix that part of the form. But we were lucky enough to have a lot of, you know, the type of people that volunteer on a political campaign are retired people and students, because they have the most time. And so we were lucky enough to have some of these people sit down on our forums, and you probably understand where I'm going now. But retired folks don't have an employer and occupation, and neither do students. And so we would observe them in this very humbling process, look at this screen and just hit donate and not enter anything, and it would say error. And then they would hit donate again, and it would say error. And they would hit donate again, and it would say error. And so when you look at like the unique events, it was like, I don't know, whatever percent. And then the non-unique events was like, every person was hitting the error like 5 times. And we're like, you wouldn't, why would you do that? To us, it's like, don't hit the button, just enter something in there. But it's not clear to people what they should enter into there if they don't have an employer and occupation. So we took that feedback and we created this variation that just adds one little line of text below these 2 fields that says, if you're retired, enter retired in both fields. And then we tested that. And we got a 63% reduction in the error rate, which, as you can imagine, has also an impact on the amount of time that it takes for people to complete the form and their likelihood to donate again. And so this was a huge win for us, but we would have never got to this conclusion if we hadn't actually done this user testing ourselves. So you can learn a lot from just looking at how users use your form, because you are not the user no matter how much you think you are. So that's all of my talk. That's what I have for you guys today. Thank you very much.
We have some time for Q&A.
Yeah.
Questions now?
Yes. You mentioned that there is an app or a software, Time to Paint. What is the software for that?
Yeah, so Time to Paint is a metric, but what you can use to measure that is webpagetest.org.
Webpage test.
Yep. And that'll give you a lot of information on how fast your page is and why it's not fast.
Just back to your form, you said that you split it up into smaller bite-sized chunks.
Yeah.
Is that something that you've seen as a best practice in general, or does it really matter on your business and your booking engine and stuff like that?
Yeah, so I would say that you have to challenge every assumption. I wouldn't assume that something that worked for us on the Obama campaign will work for you guys. But what's interesting is after we've done that, I'd never seen that before on the internet. I'm sure somebody had tried it, but I just hadn't seen it. Now I see it everywhere. Anytime I go to buy tickets for something, I always see this form that this workflow that we developed. It's sort of a best practice for me, any company that I'm at. That's what I try to do with our forms. Obviously, I test it. I don't just roll it out. But it's a best practice. But like I said, you should test everything. Yeah.
So, for example, in summarizing what you said about all these numbers is, by the way, really congratulations. You you really dominate all the numbers. For example, if we, let's say in a practical way, if I want to add a testimonial in the homepage, for how long do you recommend? You said we should test it online, right? Not in a different way. So online, how long do you think we should wait to measure the result for conversions or something? It would be 15 days, 30 days?
Yeah, this is one of the hardest things I think about A/B testing. There's not an answer. It's hard because I can't just tell you.
Mm-hmm.
You have to think really critically, right? So if it's something like your homepage where your traffic doesn't change dramatically, so take for example, I work at Optimizely, and the Optimizely homepage, the traffic on the weekdays looks very different than the traffic on the weekends. So if I calculate my sample size and it tells me to run the test for 3 days and I only run that Monday through Wednesday, I'm not catching that weekend traffic. And so I can't just blindly listen to the sample size calculator. I actually have to think critically about gathering enough traffic so that it's a true sample. It's not, the calculator is only telling you how many people you need in your sample, not what kind of people you need in your sample, right? And so at Optimizely, what I'll try to do is run it for 2 weeks, regardless of what the sample size calculator says, but I won't stop the experiment before I reach the sample size. So, the other example that I gave was on the campaign. We had email campaigns where the tail of it would be like 3 days. And then after 3 days, very few people clicked. So we didn't pay a lot of attention to it after that. But if you hit your sample size at like the first 2 hours after that send, that audience looks a lot different than the second day or the third day audience. And so it's important to know that when you're using a sample size calculator, it's only telling you how much of a sample and not what a sample. So you'll just have to figure that out and see if your weekend traffic is a lot different than your weekday traffic.
So basically, to finish to end of a cycle, right? A complete
Yeah.
cycle.
If you're testing on campaigns like we were, like email campaigns, then run it for the life of the campaign. If that seems to make sense for you.
Yeah.
Yep.
In that hypothesis process, how much of that is kind of scouring through data sets and looking and saying, like, there's got to be some wiggle room here, and how much of it is just this sense of intuition of saying, like, out on a bike ride and being like, oh, what if I change this variable?
Yeah.
I mean, is there an interplay between those two?
I would say it's definitely both, right? You could be on a bike ride in the shower and be like, oh, I'm going to test this. You get ideas anywhere. You get ideas. Like, I read Hacker News a lot, which is an engineering community, and people publish their test results there. So I'll pull ideas there and figure it out. But the reason that I keep talking about data is because that's like free experiment ideas for you. The data is already there, you just have to look at it. And coming up with ideas is, I think, the hardest part of experimentation, knowing what to test and where to test it. And your data can get you there, and you can get it. Excuse me. You can get inspiration from people like me who are talking about what I've tested, or like what you think about. But an example of that is at Optimizely, and this happened at the Obama campaign too. We would run an experiment, and we would see that the conversion rate is not 100% for people who start filling out the form. And so that's an interesting problem. And our data at Optimizely tells us there's probably a 12% drop off of people who start to fill out the form and don't complete it. And that's an absolute drop off. So if you wouldn't know that if you weren't looking at the data. And so once you come across something like that, what immediately comes to my mind is I could get a 12% absolute increase in the conversion rate if I got rid of that drop off. So then what I do is I really start digging into that. I start adding Google Analytics custom events everywhere throughout the form so I can see where the drop off is happening and then attack that specific spot. And then hopefully you can get a 12% increase in the conversion rate. But a 12% increase in the conversion rate in absolute terms is pretty unheard of. But your data is showing you that it can be done, right? You don't have a 100% conversion rate. So it's definitely both. You'll get inspiration. Yes.
With your email outreach, did you find any particular salient patterns in subject matters and what worked and what didn't?
Yeah. So what I would say in all of my years of testing is that there's nothing that I could say, try this and it will work for everybody. That's why I say always challenge the assumption, even if it's something that we tested on the Obama campaign 100 times. I think the important part to know is always be testing the subject line in the center. That's your top level metric that's going to affect who lands on your page. Because as you all know, 100% of people don't open up your emails, and then it's even fewer that click through, and then even fewer that for some reason make it to the donate page, or the actual conversion page, and then even fewer actually complete the conversion page. So definitely focus on the high level, top of the funnel, because you'll open up the funnel bigger, right? Get more people into it. But there's nothing really that I could share with you outside of the notorious email that we sent that said "Hey" from the president. That had a subject line of "Hey," which every single digital news or news publisher covered. But it was our best performing email because nobody gets an email that says "Hey" from the president. I think that's been tried by every single political organization at this point, but you might as well try it. Yeah.
My traffic in my website is 32,000 individuals a year.
Okay.
You talked about 22,000 in your experimentation per hour or per experiment. I mean, do you have any insights for organizations that are still small and don't generate that much traffic?
Yeah. Actually, I wrote a blog post on this. It's called "Busting the Small Startups Can't A/B Test Myth." It covers that point exactly in very good detail. So if you go to kylerush.net, it shows you exactly how to work around that kind of problem. Yeah.
First of all, you did a great job on the campaign is probably the first and last time I was ever engaged in a political campaign.
I think that was the president's doing.
Yeah, large part. I had two questions. One of which is, it seems like a real success you had was the quick payment option. But did you also do testing with like a recurring monthly payment? And then the second question is sort of related to that, which is, did you find that appealing to people's fear, i.e. like, oh my God, Romney's ahead in the polls, we need your money, worked better than like appealing to something altruistic or something like, hey, have dinner with the president?
Yeah. So the first thing I'll say is I just want to correct. Romney was never ahead in the polls. I gotta make that clear. As far as the recurring stuff, we did that from day one. We always provide the option for people to do a recurring donation. It's a really high level of commitment for people, what we found. So we never used that as our primary action. We definitely tested saying for donors that were already donors, to make it a recurring donation. And what's interesting, and I think this is psychological, is that the people that you would ask to make a recurring donation will say no, but then they'll make recurring donations manually. But there's something psychological about signing up for monthly contributions that wasn't very popular. Obviously, we had a lot of people in absolute numbers with recurring donations, but it didn't kind of test as well as the primary action. And then as far as the messaging aspect, yeah, that definitely worked. The one area that Romney was leading us in at certain points was fundraising. He's a billionaire and has billionaire friends, and Republicans are very good at fundraising from large donors. And we did sort of the opposite and fundraised from a lot of small donors. But I remember this test that we ran where the Romney campaign set up a campaign called the one-term fund. And so, you'd be contributing to that, and that would make Barack Obama a one-term president. And so that got us all hyped up, and we were like, let's make a two-term fund. And so what we ended up doing was we made a little app that scraped their webpage and grabbed the amount of money that they had fundraised, and then we put that up against the amount that we had fundraised. And their campaign started before ours, so they had raised more. And so we also just put a little bit of information about the Romney campaign leading us in whatever fundraising quarter, and it did really, really well for us. We got, and we also put a video on there. We made this two-term video, and I remember it was one of the coolest tests that we did because we got such a huge increase in the conversion rate. And it was the only time I've ever seen a video increase the conversion rate. But that was really one of the only times that we tried that because we wanted to run a very positive, feel-good campaign. We didn't want to run a fear-mongering operation. Yeah.
Please tell me you met the president after this.
Yeah, definitely. I met him a number of times. That's one of the cool things about working for the president is that he will come by the office, and he came by 3 times before the campaign, and then after the campaign was over, the day after the election, he was in Chicago to deliver his attendance, which is the day of. But he went around and hugged every single person that